It Came Through the Door by Marley Grimm for the Moonset Gazette. As the cacophony of Sailor Pete's accusations faded with the sound of the departing squad car, the air inside of Madam Wink's mansion thickened with a tangible tension. Cuddingmore, that gaunt specter of servitude, approached Wink with a palpable unease, his voice barely a whisper against the murmur of unrest. "Madam, perhaps it would be prudent to postpone the séance," he suggested, the lines on his face deepening with concern. But Wink, clad in her enigmatic allure, dismissed the notion with a wave of her hand, her eyes alight with a fire that bellied the chill in the air. "It must be tonight," she declared, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife through silk. "The 250th anniversary of Darla Moonset's disappearance won't come again." As the other guests shuffled, some reluctantly, around the massive, ancient table, I watched their faces, each one a mask of curiosity, fear, or sheer incredulity at the unfolding events. The table was meticulously set with fine china and crystal glassware that glimmered under the candlelight. Ornate place cards bore each guest's name in flowing, elegant script. The small touch of civility seemed almost surreal, given the night's eerie undertones. Madam Wink, ever the grand hostess, had orchestrated our seating with a curator's eye, positioning each of us according to some arcane logic known only to her. Aloysius Tutt and I found ourselves side by side, an arrangement that felt both fortuitous and slightly conspiratorial, giving our burgeoning partnership in navigating the night's clandestine powwow. As Madam Wink poised herself to commence the séance, the flicker of candlelight cast ghostly shadows dancing on the walls, and I couldn't help but notice how the light played tricks with our perceptions, making the silverware shimmer and the shadows swirl as if they too were part of the macabre ballet of our gathering. Just as Wink's hands hovered over the table with the grace of a seasoned conductor, poised to lead an orchestra through a symphony, I couldn't help but interrupt. The words rolled off my tongue with a cool edge. "Madam Wink, surely we can't begin the séance. Not until all the guests are seated." Her fingers paused midair, the delicate lace of her sleeves fluttering slightly like a captive bird. The candlelight flickered, with shadows intertwining with the darkness that crept around the edges of the room. The other guests, momentarily startled by the interruption, turned their heads in a slow, almost choreographed motion, their expressions a mixture of intrigue and apprehension. The air hung heavy, charged with a palpable tension, as if the very atmosphere waited in breathless anticipation for her response. Her laughter rippled, both charming and chilling, filling the room, echoing off the high ceilings and ancient tapestries that adorned the walls. It was a laugh that blended mockery with genuine amusement, slicing through the tense air like a stone skipping across a pond. "Mr. Grimm, everyone is seated," she said, her voice smooth yet tinged with a hint of irritation. Her brow furrowed in mild confusion, a delicate arc perfectly framed by the dim glow of the overhead chandeliers. "Oh, really?" I countered, pushing back slightly from the table, my chair legs scraping softly against the ornate rug beneath us. I leaned back, arms folded, with a pointed gaze that swept over the gathered faces before settling back on Madam Wink. Then why did I see Ellie Tink lurking in the shadows of the welcoming room when all the excitement with Sailor Pete was going down? My voice carried the weight of suspicion, cutting through the nervous whispers of our rapt audience. The question hung in the air, stark and accusing, like a grenade rolling casually onto a ballroom floor. A hushed silence descended instantly, punctuated only by the sharp intake of breath as all eyes turned, some subtly, others openly gawking, to the shadowed doorway where Ellie Tink's ghostly silhouette had hovered mere moments ago. The candlelight flickered and sputtered, dancing on the razor's edge of darkness. Madam Wink's face paled visibly beneath her meticulously painted composure, her eyes widening momentarily with genuine bewilderment. It was the first time all evening that I'd glimpsed even a fraction of vulnerability beneath her carefully constructed facade. "That's impossible," she murmured, her voice quivering just enough to betray uncertainty. "Ellie wouldn't be here tonight, not after her shop burned down." Her words dropped into the room like cold stones into a midnight lake, sending ripples of speculation and covert glances through the guests. I watched the fear bloom behind her carefully maintained poise, the dawning realization that tonight's meticulously arranged charade was already slipping dangerously off script. Yet, I pressed on, the momentum of righteous suspicion fueling the growing fire in my gut, the kind of twisted certainty you only feel when the dice are already in midair. I insist. "I saw Miss Tink clear as this damned night," I growled, my words crackling through the silence like a live wire tossed into a bathtub. "And I'd very much like to ask her a few pointed questions, especially about any cozy relationship she might have to the mysterious demise of First Mate Shelley. Hell, perhaps she could even enlighten us on the murder of this town's elusive founder, Darla Moonset." My voice lingered, thick and accusatory, drifting into the smoky air like the last gasp of a dying ember. The implication swung above Madam Wink's head, a spectral noose tightening ever so slightly with each passing second. Leaning forward, my knuckles pressing firmly against the cold table, I delivered the final blow. "And if by chance you're sheltering Miss Tink under this grandiose roof, madam, well, perhaps you might have your own hand in this tangled web of strange deaths." A ripple of shock cut through the gathered crowd, every face turning pale beneath masks of etiquette and privilege, mouths agape like goldfish suddenly dropped in vodka. Wink stared at me, her carefully curated composure now hanging by a thread, eyes blazing with equal parts outrage and fear. I held her gaze, savoring the delicious recklessness of the moment, knowing full well I'd rattled the right cage, and now the beast inside was desperate, cornered, and ready to bite. Wink recoiled as if struck, her facade cracking slightly under the weight of my words. The whispers around the table grew like a small fire being stoked into a blaze. That's when the young butler, Wink's well-dressed arm candy, stood up, his face contorted with rage. "I ought to kick your ass for that," he shouted, his hands clenched at his sides. I shrugged nonchalantly, though my heart raced with the thrill of accusation. "Or maybe you just prefer to hit me over the head when I'm not looking." "Like at Tink's shop," I shot back, watching him closely. That accusation was enough to send the boy-toy butler spiraling over the edge of his fragile composure. His eyes flashed wild, his polished veneers shattered, and suddenly he was lunging at me with the reckless fury of a debutante's scorned escort. Poor bastard, fueled by vanity and wounded pride, he swung clumsily, fists sailing through the air with all the grace of a drunken boxer at last call. I sidestepped smoothly, feeling the raw rush of adrenaline course through my veins, and delivered a sharp jab into his soft underbelly, doubling him over like a sack of potatoes. As he wheezed, gasping for air and dignity, I seized his arm, twisting it behind his back in a firm hold, tight enough to restrain but just shy of snapping bone. "Easy, kid," I hissed. "You might wrinkle that fancy suit." Then there came an unmistakable sound, a cold metallic click that echoed through the room like the final toll of a midnight bell. My spine stiffened instinctively, the rush of victory evaporating instantly as the familiar chill of imminent violence crept up my neck. Turning slightly, careful not to provoke the gunman behind me, I saw Cuttingmore, the old butler whose presence always hovered on the edge of invisibility, now standing in stark, grim contrast, his usually stoic face etched in a mask of cold menace. He pressed the unforgiving barrel of a pistol firmly against my spine. "Let him go," he growled, in a voice colder than the grave. a whisper laced with deadly promise. The room fell silent, the air thick with the acrid scent of fear and desperation, and each breath held, every eye riveted on the twisted tableau unfolding before them. "Something tells me that ain't your cane sticking in my back," I said, turning my head slightly so the old butler knew I was talking to him. "Test me and you'll make the obituary in your own rag." His voice, cold as ice. I knew now was not the time for violence, especially at the expense of my own skin. "You're lucky a chaperone showed up to this tango," I said to the young butler, releasing his arm. "I think you've overstayed your welcome, Mr. Grimm," said the old butler. "Looks like we agree on that point." I looked around at the rapt faces, all looking at me as if I just told them Santa Claus wasn't real. As I made my way toward the door, Madam Wink's voice, sharp and commanding, cracked like a whip in the darkness. "No," she snapped, her tone bearing the razor-sharp edge of authority that brooked no debate. "Let Mr. Grimm be." Her eyes, dark as storm clouds rolling in off some eldritch sea, locked onto mine, holding me captive in their tempestuous glare. "It's absolutely necessary he stays," she continued, each word heavy and deliberate, as though placing stones onto the scales of fate itself. "He must witness what's coming next." The silence in the room was now so charged it could have ignited gunpowder. Every whisper there was had died in the throats of the assembled, everyone shifting their gaze now, locked upon Wink and myself, each heartbeat ticking louder than an executioner's clock. The old mansion seemed to conspire in that moment as well, its timbers groaning softly, its ancient floorboards creaking like nervous bones beneath our feet, each sound magnified into a symphony of impending doom. We stood there, frozen on the brink, the air thick enough to choke on, as we waited for the blade of revelation to fall. It was then, in that surreal blur of candles and half-cocked pistols, that I noticed Tut stepping away from the table to join me, a peculiar act of solidarity in a town where even the goddamn trees couldn't be trusted. For a fleeting second, I felt something like hope. An ally in Moonset was as rare and precious as an honest politician, and just about as trustworthy. I straightened my jacket, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze in that shadow-infested room. "No thanks," I said, gesturing to the séance setup. "I don't need a spirit board to tell me something sinister's brewing beneath your velvet curtains, Wink." "Enjoy the show, folks," I said with a tip of my cap, turning towards the door, motioning to my newfound chum. "Let's roll, Tut." We had scarcely taken 3 steps towards freedom when Madam Wink's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Stop!" Her tone held the desperate, ragged edge of someone playing their last card. I paused mid-step, feeling the collective breath of the room stalled in my own throat, tightened by dread. "You mustn't go," she continued, regaining composure, her voice now smooth as bourbon laced with poison. "Marley Grimm, look at the faces around you. Look closely. Each guest here tonight lives shackled by fear. They hide behind their closed shutters at night, suffocating beneath the weight of conspiracies that have this town wrapped tight." She locked eyes with me, her gaze earnest and blazing with an unsettling truth. "Moonset doesn't need another frightened spectator. It needs a journalist willing to stare into the abyss and document the nightmares it spits back." Tut shifted uneasily beside me, clearing his throat with a grimace. He leaned in close, his voice pitched low enough for just me to hear. "Molly, it is my professional legal opinion that we get the high hell out of here before this séance turns into our obituary." I hesitated, feeling the eyes of Wink and the guests boring into me, awaiting a decision. The room pulsed with tension, and it was pissing me off. I was starting to lose my patience. I turned slowly back towards Madam Wink, feeling my jaw clench with the irritation of a man whose evening had already been shot to hell and back. "Look, Wink," I growled through clenched teeth, my voice low and stripped bare of pleasantries. In just this godforsaken night alone, I've seen a man drown miles from the nearest body of water. I narrowly dodged becoming a charred corpse in a blaze after someone... I paused to shoot a venomous glare at the young butler, whose expression tightened with barely contained rage. After someone thought it sporting to cold cock me when my back was turned. And not to mention the first murder, right outside house 333, the very one that kicked off this whole bullshit charade. The room was deadly silent, each word resonating through the assembled guests like bullets in a tin shack. I pressed on, the acid in my voice rising with every syllable. And after helping restrain a lunatic hell-bent on murder, my thanks was the cold steel of a pistol jammed into my spine. So tell me, Wink. I leaned forward, my tone dropping into a dangerous whisper, eyes locked on hers. Why the hell should I stick around for you and your paranormal sideshow? Because it may mean your very life, Mr. Grimm. Her voice, suddenly stripped of its usual velvet grandeur, replaced by something soft, human, and heavy, buried beneath layers of practiced elegance where tears lay that she had long refused to shed. I glanced at Tut, searching for guidance, or at least a sign that I wasn't losing my own damn mind. He simply shrugged, offering only a resigned sigh as he wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead with an impeccably embroidered handkerchief. Every instinct, every bone, every nerve in my battered body screamed at me to bolt through the doors and vanish into the protective anonymity of the night. But in my long, twisted career, documenting the darkest corners of the strange and unknown, that very same instinct had always signaled one thing. I was close to something big. Perhaps bigger and uglier than anything I'd uncovered before. With a slow, deliberate motion, I removed my hat and drew a long, steadying breath. I spoke, forcing a calm into my voice that even I didn't fully believe. All right, Wink. I'm listening. By now, as the guests shuffled nervously back into their designated spots around the slab of ancient wood Wink used as a table, not a single soul among us could claim anything resembling composure. Hell, the night had been a ceaseless freak show of violence, conspiracy, and outright madness, each act more depraved than the last. A carnival of fear staged by the devil himself. I glanced around at my fellow attendees, their faces pale and jittery, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, questioning what fresh horror would lurch next from the darkness. Cuttingmore, the ghostly old butler whose earlier pistol-happy act had already carved his name neatly atop my personal shit list, he moved silently about the room in a grim silence, igniting a chorus of tall, blood-red candles that lined the center of the table. Each flame flickered reluctantly to life, as if wary of joining our gathering, and I don't blame him. He extinguished the overhead lights, drowning us all in darkness. Shadows stretched and twisted, rising up the ornate walls, contorting into obscene shapes. Now, bathed only in that flickering candlelight, the room seemed to shrink, the air closing in like a tightening noose. Madam Wink sat at the table's head, eyes reflecting the candlelight in glistening pools of anxiety and anticipation. In that unsteady amber glow, every face around the table took on a ghostly pallor. Expressions drawn tight, as if each guest was strapped unwillingly to the rails of some infernal roller coaster, waiting helplessly for the next drop. Wink lowered herself into her chair with deliberate grace. As she settled, the room grew unbearably quiet, each guest hanging breathlessly onto the silence that preceded her words. She took a long, measured breath, fingers trembling slightly as she placed her hands flat against the table's polished surface. "Tonight," she began softly, her voice infused with equal measures strength and trepidation, "we seek a communion, not out of mere curiosity nor out of thrill-seeking folly, but because each of us, in our own ways, has been touched by the unnatural currents that run deep through Moonset's veins." She paused, eyes scanning the faces around her, making contact with each guest in turn, each nodding slightly in silent affirmation. "We summon you, Darla Moonset," she said, raising her voice to fill the room, though it trembled with subtle apprehension. "You, our town's enigmatic founder, keeper of secrets, guardian of truths hidden from mortal sight, cross the veil and speak with us now." Her words hung in the silence, unanswered at first, until a heavy, oppressive chill seeped into the room like frost on glass. The flames shivered in their holders, shadows stretching and twisting with an unnatural hunger. Wink repeated, louder, more firmly, "Darla Moonset, come forth!" From somewhere, deep in the belly of that ancient mansion, came a faint creak. A sound so subtle yet oddly precise, like the cautious footfall of an uninvited guest slipping in through a forgotten door. Madam Wink's head jerked sharply toward the noise. Eyes narrowed into the darkness with predatory intensity. Her gaze lingered there, fixed on something or someone that none of us could see. She was locked into a strange staring contest with whatever curiosity now prowled her halls. Her lips parted gently, forming words softer than a dying breath, quieter than anyone else could possibly hear. She muttered her private incantations, secretive and cryptic, speaking in hushed tones meant only for the ears of whatever lurked just beyond the fragile curtain of candlelight. Turning her head back to the table, Wink had just started to call out once more when something answered. But the presence that answered, the force that slipped silently into the room and curled like smoke around our trembling circle, was something else entirely. Something far older, far crueler. Something that was most certainly not Darla Moonset. Wink then hunched over abruptly, head sinking until it nearly touched the polished wood of the table, her form crumpling forward like a marionette with strings suddenly cut. The candles flickered nervously, their flames dipping and sputtering, weakening as if drained of life. Then came the whispering. Soft, rapid murmurs drifting through the stagnant air. It took me several moments to realize the sound was emanating from Wink herself, a frantic hush that bordered on desperation. She muttered urgently, pleadingly, her voice low, private, an exchange of secrecy between her and some unseen companion. But who? Who the hell was she whispering to? A chill colder than the winter slithered down my spine. The guests around the table sat utterly transfixed, eyes wide, jaws clenched, knuckles white, frozen in a tableau of primal fear. No one dared to breathe, let alone break the fragile circle of interlocked hands that bound us together in helpless unity. Madam Wink? A hesitant voice finally croaked. Perhaps Wayne, perhaps another poor soul lost to this ghastly affair. It didn't matter. The question hung unanswered in the oppressive gloom. Her whispers shifted now, the rhythm changing subtly, disturbingly. Wink's voice began rising and falling in pitch, clearly adopting two separate inflections as though two distinct voices were conversing from within a single tortured throat. My pulse thundered at my temples, the beating loud enough to match the grotesque duet taking place before us. Suddenly, as if suffocated by an unseen hand, the candles gasped their last breaths and extinguished in rapid succession. Each flame snuffed out until darkness swallowed the room whole, leaving us in an impenetrable black ocean. In that thick velvet silence, Wink began to giggle. But it was not the laughter of one. It echoed impossibly through the room, overlapping itself. Two voices, two entities, three, maybe four or more, intertwined in a hideous chorus of childish glee and sinister delight. "Madam Wink?" Cuddingmore's voice, usually firm, now cracked weakly from somewhere deep within the impenetrable darkness. His query hung unanswered, suspended in that pitch-black void, dripping with dread and trembling uncertainty. And then, chaos. Wink's head snapped back, farther back than should be possible. The flames of the candles returned, now like torches spitting flames into the air. The room was alive with a blaze of light. And that was when a hellish chorus of inhuman voices then barreled out of Wink's throat.
"We were never asleep. We watched. We waited. You have opened the door. We are coming through."
The voice had scarcely faded into the nightmare-thickened air when Madam Wink's body convulsed violently, her limbs snapping rigidly into impossible angles. Her back arched unnaturally, spine bending with a nauseating crunch that sent ice through my veins. The guests watched in horror as she crawled, slowly, agonizingly, onto the table, her joints popping audibly with every grotesque twist, elbows and knees jutting out at inhuman angles. She moved like a wounded spider, her limbs scrambling and slipping across the polished wood as candlelight flickered madly.
"The stars are our eyes. The earth is our flesh."
Her mouth gaped open, and a torrent of seawater gushed forth, cascading across the table in foul, briny streams. It splattered our hands, flooding the elegant place settings as Wink unleashed a chorus of guttural curses upon us, ancient obscenities spoken in languages that had never belonged to human tongues.
"Traitors! Deceivers! You will drown in your lies!"
The voices coming from Wink roared, the sound reverberating through the room like thunder, booming with the force of a hurricane. Her eyes, now pools of black, bottomless and abysmal, stared unseeing into each trembling face. In that moment of utter terror, a new presence suddenly surged forth from the shadows. Ellie Tink stood in the doorway, pale as marble but burning fiercely with purpose. In her trembling hands, she held a clay sculpture, exquisitely detailed, unmistakably crafted in the likeness of Madam Wink herself. "You have no authority here!" Ellie shouted, her voice commanding, piercing through the chaos like a spear of light. "Let her go!" The sculpture in Ellie's hands began to contort violently, clay twisting and stretching grotesquely as though an unseen force battled within it. Ellie hurled it onto the nearby velvet-draped sofa, where it writhed and twitched hideously, grotesque features shifting in tortured anguish. "Leave her now!" Ellie's voice thundered, more forceful, more powerful. Her command echoed, reverberating as though backed by centuries of ancient power. In an instant, Madam Wink's body collapsed, limp as a puppet. She slumped unconscious to the table, her breathing shallow and ragged. The room fell into stunned silence, but the horror wasn't finished with us yet. The clay sculpture on the sofa suddenly, violently shuddered once more, and then rose impossibly onto bent, claw-like limbs. It scuttled across the floorboards with sickening speed, moving crab-like and erratic. Screams now pierced the room as the cursed effigy skittered past terrified guests. One woman fainted cleanly into the arms of her neighbor. Before anyone could act, the hideous thing leapt under the windowsill and crashed through the glass, showering the room in jagged shards. And then, quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the darkened night beyond. Silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than ever, broken only by our collective trembling breaths. Without stopping to think, Or maybe because reason itself had finally abandoned me, I sprang up from my chair and bolted after the damned creature, my shoes crunching on shattered glass as I vaulted out of the mansion's front door and onto the cold cobblestones of Moonset's haunted streets. "Marley, be careful, damn it!" came Tut's voice behind me, a distant echo swallowed by the wind and my pounding pulse. But caution was a luxury I couldn't afford. No, not tonight. Not with whatever hell-born monstrosity was now loose in a town already teetering on the edge of madness. I stood under the cold glow of the street lamp, eyes darting wildly down both directions of the street, my heart slamming against my ribs like a desperate prisoner. My breath clouded in rapid puffs as I strained to see any sign of movement, any clue pointing to the thing's path. And then there came another scream, a piercing wail that shuddered through the night. I spun around toward the source, already moving before my mind registered what my body was doing. At the street corner near Lily Steinman's floral shop, beneath the dim, flickering gaslight, a man lay collapsed under the ground. His body trembling violently, he clawed at those who gathered around him, eyes wide, rolling in sheer mind-shattering terror. I shoved my way through the stunned crowd, kneeling before him, as I tried to make sense of his rambling, frantic fragments of speech, tumbling out in a feverish rush, punctuated by ragged gasps. His eyes stared blindly toward the dark tree line, his hand raised, his finger quivering with a raw panic of someone who'd glimpsed the very face of damnation itself. "There," he whispered, through choked breaths, words stumbling out like broken teeth. It went there." His voice dissolved into frantic sobs as he pointed helplessly into the ink-black mouth of the forest. The dense trees stood motionless, impenetrable, a gaping maw hungry to swallow anyone foolish enough to venture inside. I followed his gaze, knowing with gut-twisting certainty that this night was only the beginning for me. Tut was only a breath behind me, wheezing like an asthmatic bulldog as he lumbered up beside me, clearly pushing the limits of his lawyerly physique. Sweat streamed down his forehead, soaking into his fancy collar as he struggled for breath. "Marley, damn it, don't even think about chasing that unholy thing into those woods," he sputtered, leaning forward and clutching his knees. "I like you alive." I turned to face him, adrenaline still cracking through my veins like high-voltage electricity. "What the hell is going on around here, Tut?" I snapped, my voice sharper than intended. I suddenly felt trapped in a twisted carnival ride, betrayed even by the simplest of truths, as if the very breeze drifting through Moonset itself was hiding sinister motives. Tut straightened slowly, retrieving his monogrammed kerchief to mop the sweat from his brow with trembling hands. "Hell, I don't know, Marley," he finally managed, his voice low and ragged. "Just promise me you'll wait until morning at least, until the daylight gives you half a chance at surviving whatever nightmare is loose in those damn trees." "You wouldn't find it if you tried," came a voice, clear, calm and steady, from the darkness behind us. Ellie Tink stepped forward, emerging from the shadow like a specter. Gone was the quiet and demure sculptress I'd encountered earlier at the smoldering remains of her emporium. Now she stood straight-backed and defiant, eyes blazing with the fierce, quiet confidence of someone who had stared down horrors beyond my imagining. I turned sharply toward her, my jaw clenched tight. "Thought I saw you lurking in the shadows back at Wink's," my words coming out like an accusation. And maybe it was. It definitely was. "Takes a lot of nerve showing your face, especially considering it was your artistic little hands that might have been the ones that played whack-a-mole on the back of my head." She shook her head slowly, unfazed by the venom dripping from my words. "I did nothing of the sort," she said evenly, her eyes locked onto mine, clear and unwavering. "Oh, really?" I spat back, irritation surging like bitter bile in my throat. "Then why'd you bolt?" Seemed an odd time to go for a late-night jog, especially with the town's journalists laid out cold on your floor. I wasn't running from you, Tink said, her voice now carrying a chilling gravity. The sincerity in her tone stopped me cold. Who then? That boy-toy butler of Madam Wink's? My voice was demanding, but my anger had started to falter, giving way now to confusion. What were you so damn scared of? Not sure, she replied, eyes darting momentarily to the shadowed crowd huddled nearby around the man who still trembled and stammered incoherently. I just knew someone would be coming to kill me. I thought that someone might have been you. Tut and I exchanged quick glances, confusion written plainly on both of our faces. I turned back to her, utterly baffled. What the hell are you talking about, Tink? Just what kind of demonic Happy Meal did Madam Wink open back there? She shot another nervous glance at the growing crowd, eyes narrowed in caution. Not now, she said urgently. It isn't safe to talk here. I'll explain in the morning when daylight comes. I'm starting to think nowhere is safe in this damn town, I growled bitterly. Ellie's face turned grave, pale under the sickly light of the street lamp. She met my gaze with unsettling certainty. After tonight, she whispered grimly, you might very well be right. Marley Grimm for the Moonset Gazette.